Stop and consider for a moment the miracle of water, made up of 2 parts hydrogen to 1 part oxygen. It's one of the most common substances found on Earth. Along with the air that we breathe, it is the prime sustainer of life. Without it, nothing would grow, and the world would look like this. Virtually nothing could live. Almost everything that man does or tries to accomplish is dependent in some way on water. Yet this precious substance, water, is treated with casual indifference by society. Man in general takes water for granted. After all, there's so much of it that until some kind of disaster occurs, he gives little thought to its preservation or quality. Every single day in the year, our water resources are bombarded by both natural and man-made pollutants that threaten the quality of our drinking water. Most of them are invisible. Most of them are potentially dangerous. There is a clear and distinct need to protect the quality of our water, especially drinking water, through careful sampling and detailed laboratory analysis. We must constantly guard against the invasion of our water supply by these pollutants to ensure the highest quality of our water for our friends and families. In 1974, Congress passed the Safe Drinking Water Act, which required the establishment of the National Interim Primary Drinking Water Regulations. But these regulations, while setting forth national standards for the quality of our drinking water, can't ensure the maintenance of this quality. The job of maintaining those standards, the responsibility for protecting the consumer from contaminated drinking water, is a task that requires regularly scheduled sample collection and laboratory analysis. You, the water sampler, have a large responsibility, since it is you who must deliver to the analytical labs the actual samples, representing the water that our community drinks. You, then, are an important, critical member of a team. If the sample is not truly representative of the water in the distribution system, then you will have no accurate measure of the quality of what we drink. Thus, the care that you take in the collection, preservation, and storage of samples is key to being able to accurately measure the quality of your community's drinking water. A proper schedule of sampling, the use of proper containers, and the correct selection of the sampling site are important. But the most vital step in the entire sampling process is the collection of the water to be tested. More things can happen at this critical stage to influence the integrity of the sample than at any other time. 4 basic principles should be followed in a proper sampling procedure. These are: the drinking water tap must be free of contaminating devices. The sample container and cap must be handled with caution to avoid contamination. All data must be recorded clearly on the label of the sample container and in the field log. Water samples must be treated with care during transport. Once again, the drinking water tap must be free of contaminating devices. The sample container and cap must be handled with caution to avoid contamination. All data must be recorded clearly on the label of the sample container and in the field log. Water samples must be treated with care during transport. Remember these 4 cardinal principles as we now go through the detailed procedure for collecting a bacteriological sample as an example of these principles as they are applied in the field. First, select the location of the drinking water tap, preferably indoors. But if it is outdoors, avoid dust, splashing rain, snow, and any other possible sources of contamination.
I was wondering if I could take a water sample from your apartment?
Sure, come on in.
Thank you. What's that?
Examine the tap carefully. Avoid swing spouts, as they can be sites for bacteriological growth, which could contaminate the sample. Make certain the tap is situated high enough so that your sample container can be placed under it without risk of contact between the mouth of the container and the faucet. Be sure that you choose the cold water tap. Make certain that no device is attached to the faucet that might contaminate the water. Check carefully for aeration devices, hose attachments, water purification devices, or screens within the faucet by carefully examining it and remove them if present. Once you have removed any attachments, check the faucet to be sure it is clear. Now the collection process begins. Turn on the cold water tap and allow it to run for several minutes or until a constant temperature is attained. This will ensure that the sample to be collected is representative of water in the main and not of water in the interior plumbing. Next, reduce the water flow to an even, non-splashing stream. Remove the cap or stopper and the covering from the sample container. Do not let them come in contact with anything that will contaminate them. The best procedure is to hold them in your hand and avoid touching the inside with your fingers or gloves. Even the bacteria from a single fingerprint can ruin the sample. Now hold the container directly under the water flow. Do not rinse out the container prior to sampling, since the container may hold a chemical reducing agent, such as sodium thiosulfate. Do not allow any part of the container to touch the faucet. Fill the container, leaving enough room at the top to allow proper mixing at the lab. An inch or two from the top will do. Avoid splashing and do not let the water overflow from the container. Now take the container out from under the tap while the water is still flowing. Put the cap on immediately and then turn off the water. The procedure just described is for bacteriological sampling. However, even though other types of sampling require slightly different procedures, the same principles of sampling continue to apply. Now it is time to label the sample container. Remember principle number 3. All pertinent data must be legibly recorded on the container label and in the field log. First, make sure that your label is clean and big enough to contain all the recorded information and can be securely attached to the container. Use a non-smearing, waterproof marker and be sure to write carefully to ensure a clear, readable, permanent, and concise record. When you have finished, attach the label to the container and make sure it is secure. Record all of your data in the field log as each sample is taken. Your data should include the date and time of the sample, the location and type of sample, and identification of the water supply from which you have taken the sample. If chlorine residual or turbidity or other field tests are to be conducted, they should be completed at this time and notations properly made in the logbook and on the label. The sample is now ready for transport to the laboratory. This is the stage where a great many of the samples are invalidated by careless handling. Remember principle number 4. The water samples must be treated with extreme care during transport in order to assure that the water sample does not change in quality before it reaches the laboratory. It is good general practice to avoid subjecting the samples to extreme temperature changes and to make sure that you get the samples to the lab as quickly as possible. Some samples require special handling during transport, so be sure you clearly mark the package with your sampling objectives: bacteriological, organic, inorganic, or radionuclide. If the samples must be mailed to the lab, be sure that they do not arrive on a weekend or holiday. This completes the basic steps of a sound sampling procedure, but depending on the type of sampling being performed, slightly different techniques may be required. Let's take a look at each basic type of sampling. First, bacteriological sampling. To begin, remember to assure that bacteriological samples are not contaminated by picking a faucet that is clear of contaminating devices such as aeration devices or swing spouts. If such devices are attached, remove them. During shipment, bacteriological samples should be kept cold to inhibit any additional bacteriological growth during transit. Pack samples carefully in an ice chest, just as you would with soft drinks for a picnic. Never, never leave any kind of sample sitting in direct sunlight or in a closed car, unprotected from the sun's heat. The intense heat generated under these conditions can adversely affect the quality of the sample. If you mail or ship your bacteriological sample to the laboratory, not only should the sample be kept cold, but it should also arrive so that analysis can begin within 30 hours from the time the sample was collected. A longer time span could result in bacteria that are not representative of the actual quality of the water. Now let's look at inorganic sampling. In almost every case, Samples required for inorganic chemical analysis are preserved by adding a specified quantity of a preservative. Preservatives are added to keep chemicals in the sample from deteriorating or collecting on the walls of the container. If the preservative has been added to the container prior to sampling, do not rinse the container out. Make sure the label on the container shows the preservative that was added. Samples which contain a preservative need not be iced during transport, but care should be taken to protect them from extreme temperatures. Samples collected for organic chemical analysis require different methods of collection. When trihalomethanes or other volatile organics are to be determined, the sample bottles must be filled so that no airspace exists. In all cases, the bottles should not be rinsed before collecting the samples. All organic samples should be iced during transport. Samples required for radionuclide analysis don't require special collection procedures. Preservatives are necessary, and caution should be exercised as with all other sample types, so as not to expose them to extreme temperatures. In every single case, prompt analysis of the samples that you have collected is necessary to obtain results representative of the water in your system. The samples should be transported as quickly as possible. Now your part of the job is completed. If you have followed the procedures outlined, your samples will be valid for analytical purposes. Let's take a moment and review the 4 key sampling principles. The drinking water tap must be free of contaminating devices. The sample container and cap must be handled with caution to avoid contamination. All data must be recorded clearly on the label of the sample container and in the field log. Water samples must be treated with care during transport. Now you've got it, right? Well, let's see as we watch our star sampler, Joe, forget it all. He's a likable guy, very sociable. Today, he's working on samples for bacteriological analysis. He's on his sampling route and is about to arrive at Dina's luncheonette to collect a sample.
Can I get you some coffee?
Oh, yes, I'll start with coffee.
Howdy, honey.
Hello, how are you doing?
Fine now that I've seen you.
I haven't seen you in a long time, Joe.
Busy.
What have you been up to?
Checking water. I came to check your water.
You did?
Yeah.
Aren't you going to eat lunch with us?
No, it's too early for lunch. Where's the kitchen?
Okay, it's right back there. You don't mean we're contaminated, do you?
Oh, I'm really going to check it out and make sure. Listen, 5 minutes.
Okay.
First 3 don't count.
I'll be right back.
Wait a minute, Joe. You forgot to examine the tap for contaminating devices. Looks like there's a screen on that faucet, Joe. You've forgotten principle number 1. Check the faucet for contaminating devices. Oh, another no-no. Principle number 2. Guard the integrity of the container. Don't let it touch anything, and by all means protect the cap and cover from contamination. Don't put them down anywhere where they can become contaminated. Well, he's consistent anyway. Consistently wrong. Remember, Joe, fill the container to about 1 or 2 inches from the top. Don't let the water spill over or splash. And remove the sample container from the water flow before you turn off the water.
Oh, heck for it. It's worth it.
That's it, Joe. Don't disappoint us. You've done away with principle number 3. All data must be recorded clearly on the label, and the label should be securely attached to the sample container. Tough life, huh, Joe? Well, it's about quitting time, and I have a feeling that you aren't going to pack that sample so that it gets treated with care during transport.
You leaving me so soon?
I'll be right back. I gotta put this in my car.
Okay, you're gonna come back in for a drink?
Oh, that's an affirmative.
Okay.
Unbelievable, Joe. You've messed up every one of the principles of good water sampling. That sample container should be iced during transport and never, never left in the hot sun. Joe, it's very important to you and to your community. Joe is an exaggeration, of course, but every year laboratories receive thousands of water samples that are invalidated because of this same kind of abuse. The results are far-reaching. The sampler wastes time. The lab personnel waste their time analyzing a meaningless sample, and both of them waste public funds. But most important is the fact that the water supplier does not know the true quality of the water supplied to the consumer. Remember, the responsibility is yours. Avoid the simple mistakes and follow the proper sampling procedures. Review the 4 basic principles. The drinking water tap must be free of all contaminating devices. The sample container and cap must be handled with caution to avoid contamination. All data must be recorded clearly on the sample container and in the field logbook. Water samples must be treated with care during transport. The quality of the water we drink is everyone's concern, but the responsibility to collect samples that truly represent that quality is yours. No matter how large or how small the water system, you can take pride in knowing that the accuracy of the samples you collect really helps ensure that the water being consumed by your friends, your neighbors, and your family is of the highest quality.